In this tutorial, we are going to develop a user interface for an application and see that making choices which are best for the user will have an impact on the design and the overall usability of the app that we make. In the starter, we're suggesting that you have a look at a Word document and use insert date and time. So here is a blank Word document, and I'm just going to put a title in here. So I'm going to put developing a clock app, and if I just highlight that and make that a title, then I'm ready to begin with my evidence. I'm going to go to the insert menu here, and I'm going to come along here to the text menu and choose date and time. Now, date and time can be viewed in a number of different formats, from very brief formats such as 26/04/2020 to a very verbose full day name, full month name layout. These are all different formats for the same information behind the scenes, and I'll just put that in like that. So we can see that choices of formatting of the date and time will have a big impact on how a user would see our application. I'm going to switch to AppInventor. I'm in my projects section here, and I'm going to start a new project. And my project is going to be called Clock UI. UI standing for user interface. In other words, the part of the application that the end user gets to see and work with. So we have a blank viewer screen here, and I'm going to start to put on some widgets. So I'm going to take a button and put that on there, and the text on the button is going to say click for time. And the next thing I'm going to put on is a label, and the label is going to say time here. Now you should get into the habit of always renaming these widgets that you've put on as soon as you put them on there. So the button should be renamed from button 1 to button get time perhaps. And the label is going to be renamed to label time. Okay, so we're ready to go. Remember that you will need to have AI starter loaded. So I'm going to choose AI starter. AI starter will run as a background process, and that should give you the emulator if you're working on a Windows computer, or it should just run automatically when you connect if you're using a Mac. So I have my layout here, but there's no code behind the scenes. So I'm going to go to blocks, and I'm going to say that when button get time is clicked, so button get time has got an event handler called click, and when that happens I want to change the label. So I'm going to go to label, I'm going to set label time. Now I picked just the first one that came to hand there, has margins, but I want to change that to the text. The text is what I actually want to change when my code runs. What do I want to change it to? Well, I need to have some kind of access to the system clock. So back at designer, I am going to go for a new type of widget, which is a sensor. So if I open up the sensors, you'll see there's a range of different things that your phone can measure or sense, and one of them is the time, which it does with a clock. If I drag the clock onto the screen and drop it, it doesn't appear on the screen, it appears as a non-visible component below the screen. And since there will only be one clock on this machine, I'm going to use that as clock 1. Notice that it's enabled and that it has a 1000 millisecond interval, which means that this timer will set off every 1 second. Back at blocks, I am going to change that time, and I'm going to look at the clock now, and I'm going to say I want to get the current time. So that will be something called call clock now. So there we go. When I press the button, I want to change the label to have the time now from the clock. And I'm just going to connect that now to the emulator. Remember that this will take a certain amount of time to happen. So it would be a good time to take a screenshot of any of your development and paste it into your Word document so that you can then explain what you've been doing as you have gone along. I'll move my phone emulator over here so that we can see what's going on in it. And I'm just going to pause the video until that has loaded. So now my application has loaded up. I have a button that says click for time. I've got my label, it says time here. And when I click it, I don't get the time. I get a lot of information. The time may well be in there. So hour of day equals 21, minute equals 53. Seems about right for 9:53 p.m. But not particularly useful for the end user. So one of the things that we're looking to do is to improve what we see on the screen in order for the user to have an effective application. Going back to the clock object, I can see that there are other options in here. There is format time and format date time are all available. So I'm going to take that and snap it on here. It wants an instant and it wants a pattern. So I'm going to put the instant as being now, and the pattern is this, the default double M, double D, four Ys, double H, double M, double S, and A. If I go back to the phone, click for time again, and you can see that what that's done is to give 0426. That's an American format to the way the date is presented, and then the time with an AM, PM on the end. So the pattern that's been used here is directly affecting what we see on screen as the output. So there are a few more things that we might want to do then to make things better for the end user. I'm just going to go and check on my instructions here, make sure we don't miss anything out. So what we actually find is that clock now takes in huge number, which is the number of milliseconds since the 1st of January 1970, and we used our formatting to then replace that with something which is much more human understandable. We can change the patterns that are available. Instead of this American month, day version, we can change to something more English-like, day, 3-letter month, and then year as a 2-digit. So let's just go ahead and do something like that. So I'm just going to go in, edit the pattern here. So I want day, month is a 3-letter code for that, and then YY is the 2-digit date. The other thing I'm going to do is to improve the overall appearance of what's going on here. So my button stuck over in the corner there isn't very attractive. I'm going to go for width and make that fill parent, and that way it becomes a nice stretched clickable button. Time here again isn't very effective, so I'm going to maybe make the background color stand out a little bit, make that yellow, and a font size of maybe something like 36 point. And again, if I stretch that to fill parent, it will fill the whole screen. And if I change the text alignment to center, it will then neatly line that up. So back at my phone, click for time, and I'm getting this font is perhaps a little bit big at the moment and it's not fitting onto a single line. Okay, if you want to investigate the formats for the time, then you can see them here. You can find them just by searching for Android date and time patterns or something along those lines. So the next moves we want to do is to improve the overall appearance of our user interface. Rather than having to click a button, which is not something a user would want to do every time they want to know the time, we will replace it with the use of the timer for the trigger. And instead of one line that spills over more than one line of text, we will split the actual information into different chunks, as you can see here. So back here, we want to have some additional labels. I'm going to put on something here called label day. And I want to put on something called label date. And we also want to go back to our blocks, and instead of this click here, what we want to do is to say when the clock goes to each second, so when the clock's timer fires, then we want to update what's going on. So I'm going to duplicate that code there. And I'm actually going to duplicate it a few more times because it's very easy to now make some small changes. I want to set label day, and I don't want to mess about with this bit here. I'm going to use a different clock function. So I'm going to use, these are all lots of add, duration, make, but down here we have things like month and weekday name. So returns the name of the day. That sounds pretty good. And it wants an instant, so we'll put in, and that's firing because the timer is already switched on. There we go. And we also want to get just the date part. So I'm going to set label date to be just the date with no time in it. So day, month, year. If I go and check what's happening there, we can see that it is indeed updating our display. It's showing Sunday, 26th of April here. And I don't need the date here and here. So if I just go and have a look at my instructions, opportunities for improvement, time format doesn't need to include a date, labels should be a bit better looking, and we can use a horizontal arrangement to adjust and put the day and the date side by side. So back to AppInventor, most of what we're going to do now is in the designer view. I'm going to layout. I'm going to put a horizontal arrangement here. I'm going to make the width of that fill parent so that it stretches all the way across. This label here, which is labeled day, it would help if it said day here. I'm going to make that have a width of 50%, and that way it will take up half the screen. And I'll also give it a background color, maybe of light grey. This here is the date. And again, I'm going to give that a width of 50%. Background color grey. And drop it into, if I drop them 1 and 2 side by side, then we have a better view here. Finally,